You're listening to the Business Mike podcast. Amazing interviews with entrepreneurs and industry thought leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Business Mike podcast. And joining me today is Ellie. Ellie, for the purposes of our viewers and listeners, can you let everybody know a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. And first of all, Dowdy, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So basically what we do is I'm the CEO and founder of Back Engine. And what we do is help businesses listen to their customers. We found that all too often in B2B, it's very, very hard to have a systematic approach to listening to customers. And most of the time it's happening just haphazardly. And most of the time, the broader organization doesn't really understand the nuance of how customers are reacting to the business. And what we do is we create a very systemic, very automated, AI-powered way for the entire organization, everyone from the executives to the product team, to the marketing team, the operations, to listen to the customers and ultimately build a customer-obsessed business.
All right, fantastic. Now, Ellie, I did some research and from my research, basically, you founded and exited two successful companies before Back Engine. And I wanted to find out from you what specific gap or pain point in the B2B SaaS inspired you to start a Back Engine, and how does it differ from your previous ventures?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Having started now three companies, one of the questions I ask myself often is like, why do I keep doing this? Because startups are not the easiest thing in the world. In fact, they're probably one of the most painful things someone can do. It's incredibly hard, and there are ups and downs, and there's lots of emotional turmoil in trying to build something. And yet I keep coming back to doing it. And the reason is, and I've done a lot of introspection on this, my first two companies were basically B2B businesses where I identified a need in a market that I wasn't really a user of. The first one was ad tech. I felt like with mobile phones emerging, there was an opportunity to combine location data and mobile ad targeting and do something interesting. But I'd never bought mobile ads. I'd never bought ads in general. I just saw an opportunity and I built a business around it. And with Sense 360, it was similar. I thought there was an opportunity to create real-time market research for big businesses by taking advantage of all the new data that existed in the world instead of relying on surveys. And again, I'd never really done surveys. I'd never worked at any of the companies that became customers. It was just a need and an opportunity that I identified. Along the process of building those two companies, one thing that really, really felt like a pain to me is that I couldn't listen to our customers. When we were a small little team and we were all working in a, quote unquote garage, I knew exactly who our customers were, what they cared about, what they needed, what they wanted from us, because I was on the phone with them every single day. I signed most of them. And then as the company started to grow and we started to add more people and more teams, I started to feel more and more disconnected from those customers. And that, as a founder, was so painful because I felt like the only reason we were successful in the early days is because I was hearing those customers. I knew their pains. I knew what we needed to do for them, and I knew how to service them. And as I started to lose that connection, I felt like I was losing my superpower. And I felt like as a business, we were slowing down and starting to have more misses. And so when I left Sense 360 and I started to sort of just think about what I would do next, the thing that kept calling me back was trying to solve that problem. How do you, as a founder, as a CEO, as an executive team, as a product leader, as a operations leader, how do you stay really close to the customer, even as you get to scale, and especially as you get to scale? And that's what led me to build Back Engine. It was just a personal passion that I had for building a product for the first time that I personally wanted and I would be user number one of.
Yeah, so you built something for yourself that you understood directly from the customer's perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, Back Engine is creating a new category around, in particular, high-velocity customer feedback loops. And I just wanted you to explain to the audience, because when I read that, I too wasn't conversant enough with the term. So what does the term mean in practice? And why is speed so critical to customer feedback today in particular?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the second part of that. Why is it super critical? Well, the world is changing really, really, really fast. I mean, AI in specific is just causing disruption everywhere. And so it doesn't matter what business you run, things are changing. And that means that you need to be able to evolve and react as quickly as the market is changing, or you are going to be left behind. And so in a world like that, where just there's so much volatility, you need to be able to hear your customers, understand both what the risks are, what the opportunities are, and react. And what I found is that without being able to listen to the customers, you just can't do it quickly enough. And so when I think about a high velocity feedback loop, I know companies need to hear the feedback quickly. And what we're building is basically a mechanism by which to hear customers systematically and organizationally and be able to react to what those customers are saying immediately, which means hearing it quickly, being able to understand it quickly and reacting to it quickly. And that's what we're building, is just a systematic way of doing that at scale.
Right. So in your benchmark study, because I read and found out that you did one on 150 B2B SAS companies, where you found that about 21% had no clear owner of customer feedback, something I too have experienced in the organizations where I've worked. And so I want to find out from you why ownership is such a widespread issue, and how does that impact the business performance?
It was very surprising to me to hear that stat, because every time I talk to a CEO or an organization, they all talk about loving their customers and they all talk about doing all this stuff to try and like build for their customer. The term customer obsession is one I hear so often, and yet when we asked the question and found out that 21% of organizations didn't even have an owner for it, it just really, really started to make me question what the definitional issue around customer obsession is and customer love, and how it could be possible that someone could speak about loving their customers but yet not have an owner internally around it. And when I started to think more about it and try to understand, like, from others' perspective, it became pretty obvious for me why so many companies just don't have an owner around it. And I think the reason is because there historically, in a B2B business, it's been very hard to capture what customers are saying. When I think about a B2C business, so basically a business selling to consumers, they have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions of customers. And so if you want to understand what they are thinking, all you have to do is survey them. And even if you get a tiny response rate, if you get a 1, 2, 3% of people to respond to you, you're still going to get hundreds of thousands of people responding, and you're going to have a treasure trove of data. And we've had the technology to do that for decades and decades, and that's why you have all these voice of the customer solutions in B2C, and that would be like Medallion, Qualtrics, and SurveyMonkey, and so on and so forth. And in those B2C organizations, you actually have an owner. You have a voice of the customer team usually that owns standing up this program, launching it, analyzing the data, disseminating it across the organization. But in B2B, it really hasn't been possible to capture this data, because if you use the same technology, surveys, well, like, what are you going to do? A big B2B business might have 500 customers. If you're going to get a 5% response rate once a quarter, you're talking about a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of data, which you can't really do anything with. You're not really going to understand your customer's voice and their needs and their wants. And so because the data didn't exist, it didn't make sense to create an owner. And what ended up happening is, as teams started to spin up customer success teams, what they would say is, hey, your job is to make sure customers are successful. Your job is to make sure that they expand, that they renew. And as a result, you're talking to customers all day long. So even though it's not part of your job requirements, even though you're not going to be gold on it, even though we're not going to measure you on it, can you please also like own customer feedback? And so even the 79% of companies that do have an owner around it, I think it's more of a de facto owner. I don't think it's an actual owner where someone is in charge of it and gold and measured by it and thinking about it all the time. It's just something that they kind of do because they're in the right place to do it. And I think that really has to change in B2B. I really think it does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe Back Engine is trying to solve some of those challenges there. I'm just curious as to how you got into customer experience, in particular, why that field and not any other, say marketing or finance or anything else. How did you end up in customer experience in particular?
Yeah, there are two things that happened serendipitously that I think led me to customer experience. The first is it's always been an intrinsic sort of like foundational belief for me that the only way to build a great company is to listen to customers. And part of that, I spent a couple of years at Amazon, and Amazon is a customer obsessed organization. Everything is about the customer. And so that was also drilled into me and drilled into me. And when I think about my experience building ThinkNear and Sense 360, in both cases, I think that the most important part of that business was that we were obsessed with our customers. I spent so many hours on calls and in conversations and in emails with customers. I never let that go. And we used to talk about how we were building 20-year relationships with our customers, that it was not a cruise ship where if you go into a cruise ship and you see someone and you're only going to see them for the next 7 days, the way you interact with them is very different than if you get like a new neighbor and they're going to live next to you for many, many years. Like the way you're going to interact with them is just fundamentally different. And I would always tell the team, we are in a 20-year relationship with our customers. We are not going to nickel and dime them. We are not going to be focused on extracting value. We are here because we're building a long-term relationship. And that ethos really shaped the two businesses. They made us successful. I think it was the most important part of why we ended up having success. So given that, I always felt like a strong affinity to this problem specifically and wanting to solve it in a systematic way. The second thing is that the company that acquired Sense 360 happened to be Medallia, which is one of the big VOC companies in the world. And getting a chance to see what VOC looks like in a B2C setting where you have so much data and all the things you could do with it was astounding to me. It just like both fascinated me. I found it incredibly interesting. And it also furthered my belief that there was something really missing in the B2B space. And so the combination of Amazon and that intrinsic love for the customer and getting a chance to be at Medallia for a couple of years really just set me up to do this in a very serendipitous way.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And many of us end up in this particular field exactly like you. It's one thing leading to another. Nobody that I've interviewed yet has told me that, when I was in high school, it's something I dreamed of. And yeah, that's how I ended up in Norway. So that's good to hear. My next question is, very many customer experience or customer service teams, and you mentioned it earlier, that they're stretched thin and not directly measured on feedback collection. So I wanted to find out from you what frameworks or tools can help them demonstrate ROI of customer feedback to secure executive buy-in, because sometimes the hurdle is securing funds from the C-suite, especially when it comes to funding customer-related expenses.
Yeah. It's a really good question, but it's also one of the hardest questions to answer because a lot of what customer feedback does is it shapes every part of the business. It shapes the strategy the executive team sets, the resource allocation, it shapes the product, it shapes the marketing. But a lot of these things are hard to quantify. You don't have an A/B test where you could say, well, if we hadn't done that, what would it have looked like? And that's always been one of the struggles with voice of the customer generally, but especially in a B2B setting where you're like, it's very painful if you don't have a tool and the CS leader is trying to do this manually. It's a massive investment, and a massive investment that's hard to quantify is generally hard, and maybe another reason why so many companies don't have actual stated owners of customer feedback. What we did, and this was the reason for the report that you mentioned earlier, we wanted to quantify. We wanted to understand the ROI because intrinsically we believed that there was an ROI, but we wanted to quantify it. So what we did in the report is we interviewed or surveyed 150 B2B leaders, and we asked them two sets of questions. One was just trying to understand how they collected customer feedback, who owned it, how often, what tools. And we basically bucketed those leaders and those companies into one of four stages, from beginner, where they did very, very little, to experts, where they had a systematic way of collecting, capturing, synthesizing, and distributing all of the customer feedback. And then the second thing we did is we asked them a whole series of questions around their performance. So try to understand, what did net revenue retention look like, and how was it changing, and CSAT scores and NPS, and basically all sorts of different metrics, even like competitive win rates. And we analyze to understand, do companies that are advanced or experts perform better than companies that are beginners, and how does that evolution look like as they move through the stages? And what we found was incredibly conclusive data that the more companies invest in being able to capture and share and act on all of this customer feedback, they better their perform on almost every metric, from win rates at the point of sale, so all the way at the new customer acquisition, to retention, to NPS, to CSAT, to everything in between. If they listen to the customers and they have a real way of doing that, every part of the business improves. And we now have tons and tons of data to support this. And so if anyone's trying to build a business case just internally to say, I should own this, they should look at the report, because I think they'll have very, very conclusive data that they can share with their executive team.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll make sure to link that in the show notes, that if anyone is interested, they can download it and view it for themselves. So a back engine, it integrates various tools such as Slack, Salesforce, and many others. So how does this integration help teams act on feedback faster and more effectively?
Yeah, so we do three things basically. So we integrate with all these different communication tools. So anywhere you're talking to your customers, whether it's like a video conferencing tool, or you're emailing with them, or you're slacking with them, however you talk to those customers, we are integrating and we are grabbing all of those customer communications, and we analyze them using AI. And we basically present the data back in three ways. The highest level view is we give you trends to understand what's changing. Are customers happier or less happy than they were before? Are they bringing up competitors more often or less often? Are they, when they talk about the product, are they highlighting things that they're doing with it that are positive, or are they highlighting pain? And so on and so forth. And so as an executive team, you can start to see what's changing in the business. So you launch a new feature. How does that impact how customers are talking to you? A competitor launches something. How's that changing? You change up your org structure. What is the effect on the customer? And you can see that immediately and instantly, and it's in a very quantifiable way. The second thing we do is we help you analyze the data. So we have a series of reports that you can run against all of your customer data. So if you're trying to understand what are the major reasons driving churn, you click a button, we do all of the analysis, we output a report for you. If you're trying to understand what are the major bugs that are blocking customers from using the product, boom, a report, we do that for you. We have about 24 reports that we can run instantly for you on top of all of your customer data to help you answer the very hard questions that are really driving impact for your business. And we can now answer those for you. And then the last thing we do is we let any team and any person at the company basically create a little listening post. If they could be a fly on the wall in every customer conversation, they probably wouldn't want to hear everything. There's just too much, but there are probably very specific things that they care about. The CS leader might care about any manifestation of churn, and the CEO might care about competitive mentions, and the product leader might care about feature requests, and the CTO might care about bugs. And we let them create these very personalized listening posts where anytime a customer brings up something that they should know about, that they should care about, we automatically push it to them, whether by email or in Slack or in Salesforce. We make sure that those people see it in the tools that they're already using. And in that way, what you end up having is an organization where every person is hearing the things directly from the customers that they need to hear, where anyone at the company can analyze and go really deep to understand, not anecdotally, but in a data-driven way, what's changing in the business, and understanding why it's happening and what they should do about it, and then be able to, at an executive level, see the trends and sort of have a leading indicator of how the business is evolving and what the team needs to focus on. So that's the product in a nutshell.
Right. Now, when I was doing research for this particular interview, one of the things that jumped out at me was the article that you wrote about the customer feedback trap in B2B SAS. So what is this trap, and how can companies avoid falling into this trap?
Yeah. So to me, there are a lot of traps in feedback, but and there are a few that I've written about, but the one that stands out to me most is when I'll actually share a story that will make it a little bit, I think, bring it to life. So, uh, after one of my acquisitions, the CEO was of the company that acquired us was on the phone with a customer, and the customer basically said, "Hey, we really want this feature." And it was a very, very small feature that no one had ever asked about. But because the CEO was on a call and he heard it, he anchored around it and he felt very, very personally invested and emotionally connected with that feature. And he really pushed us to go build it. And no amount of um, conversations that we had with him would get him to move off of that specific feature that he wanted us to build. And we talked to customers all the time, and we knew that this was not something that was being widely asked. We knew it was not our highest priority. But because we didn't have data and because we didn't have a systematic way of capturing what customers were saying, it was basically just me and others on the team saying, we never hear it, and him saying, well, I heard it. And ultimately, we had to build it and no one used it. And to me, that's a massive trap because so many times when we deal in customer feedback, because we don't have a systematic way of capturing it, we're dealing in anecdotes, we're dealing in translation, we're dealing in bias. And so you end up having so much misalignment inside of a company around the strategy, around what to build, around what the root causes are. And most of the time it comes down to this trap that the way we collect customer feedback generally is by randomly hearing it on a couple of calls and inferring massive trends from it. And that's very dangerous.
Thank you for explaining that. And that happens a lot sometimes, even when customers collect too much data and they don't quite know how to make sense of it or what data is relevant for what. They just collect everything for the sake of collecting it.
That's
So
right.
it's true on the opposite side of the scale as well. And so, Elia, I just wanted to find out from you as we wind up, in summary, um, in as far as your journey is concerned, what are however many you can share, the key lessons that you've learned about customer service engagement that make a meaningful difference for a business? So what things have you seen or experienced that really stand out that organizations should really look out for when handling their customers?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is you first need to care. Like you really need to care about your customers because I've never been seen a business thrive without actually respecting the customer and realizing that the business stands on the backs of customers. If you don't have customers, you don't have a business. And so I think making sure that organizationally people care is a really, really big deal. I think the second thing that I think a lot about when it comes to customers is that uh, it's very, very easy to fall into the comfortable place of not really talking to your customers to assume that things are okay as long as usage data is going well and as long as like customers aren't complaining. But I think that is a massive mistake, especially in B2B. We have such an opportunity to create real relationships with those customers, to set up teams that are talking to them, that are continuously engaged with them, and that are getting them to share their feedback. Because if you don't get them to speak, nothing else you do is going to matter because you really won't know what they care about. And then the third thing is the reason why I started Back Engine. And I think it really is important to invest in mechanisms. It doesn't have to be Back Engine, but it has to be some mechanism by which to collect what those customers are saying and make sure that you are disseminating and sharing it across the organization. Because it doesn't help to love the customer and to talk to the customer if you're not going to do anything with what those customers are saying. If you do those three things, I think everything else kind of falls into place. Like there's so many tactics around how you should spin up a CS team or an AM team and where they should report into and what they should be doing. And like to me, all of that is secondary. If you love your customers, you're talking to them and you're finding a way to make sure that what they say permeates across the organization, everything else will take care of itself because you'll end up building the right product, the right experience, the right organization, and you'll end up having a very successful business.
Wow, well said, Ellie. And that is a very good way for us to conclude this interview. But before we let you go, maybe can you just let the viewers and listeners know how they can connect with you, how they can get their hands on that report that you mentioned earlier, and how they can connect with you on LinkedIn or any other social media platform where you are?
Absolutely. So, very easy the report is on backengine.ai. And so you can find it there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Ellie Portnoy. And I believe it's actually linkedin.com/Ellie Portnoy, but I might be wrong. So just search for me there. I should come up. And anyone can email me, eli@backengine.ai. And really would love to hear from anyone and talk about anything related to customers.
Well, thank you so much, Ellie. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to engaging you once again on this critical issue of our customer experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.